started with me, the initial member, and we've now grown, with no aircraft, we've now grown to be 200 people, all volunteers and members of the Army Aviation Heritage Foundation chapter here in Mesa. And we also have 8 aircraft. And what we try to do, to be honest with you, working with the Commander of Air Force, is to keep our legacy alive. Okay, now the legacy for most of us guys are Vietnam. And like you see in this museum, you got World War II aircraft in here, one aircraft from Korea, but the legacy is the aircraft, and we're slowly but surely going west. And so when we go west, at least the aircraft will be here. And I brief the docents here, so the stories are still alive here in these aircraft, okay? And for me, it's Vietnam and Army Aviation. Now, Army Aviation was created because of Vietnam. It is today. It's also one of the largest air forces in the United States. Don't have all the expensive aircraft the Air Force have, but we have very reasonable price aircraft, okay? And my career started off Life magazine, high school to flight school. The Army still has that. It's pretty difficult to get into it, but I was in my second year of college, completed my second year of college at San Jose State, saw the magazine article, high school to flight school, in Life magazine. Some of you might remember that magazine. And my best friend and I both signed up for the Army. We went to basic training, and then we went to flight school, and 117 of my class all graduated. We started with about 150, and do not pass go, do not get $200. Everybody, 117 of us went direct to Vietnam, okay? So you went to Vietnam, and in my case, I was a warrant officer. When I came back from Vietnam, I went to a place called Hunter Army Airfield, where the Cobra School was at. I got Cobra instructor pilot qualified, became a Cobra instructor pilot, spent about a year and a half there, then went back to Vietnam flying Cobras for another year in Vietnam, okay? So anyway, and somehow between my first tour and second tour, I took a direct commission from W2 to first lieutenant, and somehow I managed to retire as a 06 in the United States Army full colonel. So, and the aircraft I flew were the UH-1s, the Cobras, and then my last 10 years in the Army, I flew Apaches. Well, the United States Army, basically, most people don't realize, it was the largest air force in the world during the Vietnam War. And to give you an example, this is a UH-1, and this is the gunship, but the iconic bird was probably the lift ship, which is a little bit larger than this one. And we had 7,000 UH-1s in Vietnam, 7,000, of which we left 3,400 in Vietnam. We lost 3,400 of them. So our attrition rate was quite high for helicopter crews. I think we lost right at about 5,100 helicopter people. It counts the crew chiefs, the gunners, and the pilots in Vietnam. So we lost, I believe it's about almost 9% of the losses in Vietnam were helicopter crews. Another example of the helicopter crews is the OH-6 Cayuse. Hueys helicopter built 1,400, I think 6 of them during the Vietnam War, and we lost 842 of those in Vietnam. So attrition rate was quite high. And so the Army, the question you ask is how they do it. Well, we all started off at a place called Mineral Wells, Texas, which is now closed, and that was primary flight school. You flew very small helicopters, and you learned how to fly basic a helicopter. And then you either went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, or Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia. The Army opened up Hunter Army Airfield because of Vietnam, so the second training base. And that's how we were pumping them out. I think the classes were up to 200-300 a class, graduating every month. When you graduated from flight school, you went to a Assault Helicopter Company, okay? And the Assault Helicopter Company had 16. That's the UH-1 there, Huey D model, or it could be an H model, but it's an H. That's a troop ship. You see it's got a larger compartment back here. This one has a 44-foot rotor on it. That one has a 48-foot rotor. So you went and flew those. And in our unit, you had to volunteer to go to guns. I wanted to fly gunships. They're more armed. And you had to become an aircraft commander in the Huey. And then when you became an aircraft commander, then you had to volunteer to go to the gun platoon. In the American Army, you had to be voted in the gun platoon. In my case, I made aircraft commander in 2 months flying the Huey slick ship. And not because I was a good pilot, but we were very short pilots. So I became an aircraft commander in 2 months. And then 3 months in, one of these got shot down by a 50. Killed all 4 of them. The gun platoon leader walked in the tent one day and said, "Sail, get your butt, you're in the gun platoon." So I flew these for the last 9 months in Vietnam. Okay? And like I said, I came back from flying these, went to Hunter Army Airfield, which was the school for the Cobra. for the Army, and went there and became a Cobra IP. Then went back to Vietnam flying Cobras. My last 10 years, though, I was very fortunate. I flew the Apache. I was the TrendingWWWI system manager for Apache, which we build the Apache right across the street here at Boeing. I think most challenging mission is, I think we walked in, first of all, understand the model for Army aviation during Vietnam and today is we fly above the best. Now, who are the best? It ain't us. It's the guys on the ground down there, the infantry, the artillery guys, the armor guys. So again, the motto is we fly above the best. So the most challenging mission was supporting them, especially a young soldier that's in contact and they're sometimes crying at you on the radio and stuff like that, and you come on board with one of these and you take on the target, okay?
And for the injured soldier on the ground to hear the sound of the Huey coming, the thump, thump, thump.
You got it.
Like
Wop,
angel,
wop, wop, we call it. I'm an
coming.
Italian, so I can say wop, wop, wop,
Okay,
okay?
wop, wop, wop. And it's like angels falling from the sky.
You're exactly right, and make sure we had dust-off units in Vietnam, very courageous pilots and everything else, but everybody flying a UH-1, to include the gunship guys, our secondary mission was medevac. So many a time we'd be doing gun runs and stuff like that, and we get done, and the guy on the ground would call you up and say, listen, I got 2 or 3 wounded, can you bring them home for me? And we'd land with the gunship and put them in here and then take them to the hospitals. So the Army has a thing called the magic 60 minutes or the 1 hour. We believe if we can get from the time you're wounded and get you to a hospital within 1 hour, you have over a 90% chance of surviving. And that's why the Huey helicopters are so important, because we can pick the wounded up just like that and get them medevac.
The climate and the terrain must have just been incredibly difficult.
Well, you mentioned a key word, climate and terrain. That's why the helicopter was so valuable in Vietnam. You had a lot of jungle, single, double, triple tree canopies that could cut out an LZ-4 and you could come in and get it. You know, a fixed-wing airplane can't get in and get out of there, so the helicopter became quite valuable because of the climate and the terrain. High density altitudes and all the jungle out there, yeah. This is a B model gunship that flew in Vietnam from 1966 to 1972. And we came out of the war in January of '73. And I'd like to point out one thing also on that is, everybody kind of mentions, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a politician, that Vietnam was just like Afghanistan, or Afghanistan was just like Vietnam. It wasn't the same. Vietnam stayed a country for 2 years after we pulled out of Vietnam. And you can go into history and find out why we pulled out of Vietnam. We signed the peace accords, but I understand the United States decided not to abide by the peace accords, so we failed to finance South Vietnam anymore. And that's when they ran out of money and everything else. You know, I'm not getting into the politicians. People ask me, what do you think about the Vietnam War? And all I can tell you is, I'll let you historians figure it out. However, when my country called us, we went and served. But this is a B model gunship. It, again, like I say, served in Vietnam from '66 to '72. It flew over 2,500 hours of actual combat missions. Okay, 2,500 hours. Remember, when you pull a gunship out, you're pulling a gunship out for a reason. It's just not flying, resupplying like you were talking about. And on this particular aircraft, it flew in the 282nd. And the 282nd, if we come over here, let's go to this door. We had a photograph of this actual aircraft in Vietnam. So we restored this aircraft to that photograph. The 282nd was called the Black Cats, as you can see here. However, the gunships are called the Alley Cats. So all the slicks were Black Cats and the guns were Alley Cats. And we try to honor those who helped build this aircraft or kind of flew them. Like I said, I flew them in Vietnam my first tour. And this aircraft got hit 94 times, documented. And those aren't just bullet hole marks. If you'll see, there's a patch under each one of these. So this one got hit 94 times. It got hit so badly on 3 different occasions, they had to go get restored, not restored, but go into depot maintenance and get rebuilt again. So it got 3 times in Vietnam. This is what they call a 40mm bird. There's the 40mm grenade launcher on the nose, sitting right there. That's a 40mm grenade, much similar to what the infantry calls an M209 grenade. And if you look over here, you can see where the ammunition is carried. We carried a box back here with about 400 rounds of 40mm. The ammo went right through the middle of the aircraft and then right up by the co-pilot gunner's leg into that, and that was his sight sitting right up here. And that's how he fired the 40mm. aircraft commander flew in that seat over there, and that's his rocket sight sitting there. We never used the rocket sight, hardly. We should have taken off, say, wait, because these rockets were designed to fire off an airplane like the Hellcat, or the Wildcat, I should say, over there. And we fly at 80 knots, and they fly at 200 knots. So they weather vane into the wind. And it's quite an art to fire them. Because if you want to go to the left, you aim the rocket to the right. Because the wind then strikes the nose of the rocket this way, and it comes out like that. So if you're going down a valley and you want to get the ridge, you put the nose over here and you shoot it that way. This aircraft only had one door gunner crew chief. The crew chief always said here, and one door gunner get wounded in it. The other aircraft we have outside had 6 get wounded in it.
So how many of these you think are of the restored helicopters? You think
Well, that's
there
a
are?
great question. I'm guessing probably around 50, 60 UH-1s, Bs, like this one, Gunship. Bell no longer makes the rotor blades for them, so you know, and of course this is a static bird. So we don't have to have flyable blades on this one. This one took us, we got it from the we got it from the Army Asian Heritage Foundation out of Atlanta, which we're a chapter of. This one had been underwater. We work out of a place called Intercoastal Electronics, just down the road. They build the tactical engagement simulation system for the Army, okay? They let us, free of charge. We have a thing called the pod shop. It's a big hangar and all kinds of stuff. And we're in there for over 5 years now at no charge and no utility bills. So that's where we store these aircraft. This one was the very first, and it took us 2 years and 4,000 man-hours. The other one outside took us about a year and 2,000 man-hours. So. Well, if you go to flyable, we have 2 flyable aircraft. We have an AH-1F model Cobra here in our Hangar 107 on Falcon Field. We have a UH-1H model flyable. We're the only organization in the United States that you can actually buy a Cobra ride in. Several people sell UH-1 rides, but we also sell rides in our AH-1F Cobra. And we're the only, we have an FAA waiver to do that, okay? So, yeah, flyable parts are very hard to get and very, very expensive. Statics aren't too bad because you can, that's like a brand new blade, but it's a non-flyable blade up there. And I think we did a pretty good job. If you look at that instrument panel in there, I never flew one in Vietnam, looked that good. Matter of fact, if it started, we flew it. And as long as that guy, the crew chief, got in that seat right there, I felt pretty confident we'd be flying. If you notice something on the front, we have armored plating seats up there. Okay? If you look in the back, what's he got?
Not much.
Nothing. Sometimes they'd put a chicken plate down there. 2 M60, this is a unique bird because we have a 50 on that one, but the photograph had a 50 on it. So a guy out of Sholo, John Boucher, had a 50 and he gave us a 50 caliber. So that was very good. But she's restored to the U.S. Army. We have guys who build models like Monogram and Revell come in here and take photographs of it because to make sure they get the decals in the right place. We have about 9 A&Ps and about 4 IAs, and then we have a bunch of Cobra pilots and that stuff. And we also have, to be honest with you, we have a lot of civilians. So we have firefighters, first responders, you name it. They come from all over. They just want to keep the legacy going for us and help us. So, and the problem with the legacy is, don't get me wrong, is the second bird that's outside. We got that from the Northern California VHPA, Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, and the reason we got it. Ken Fritz was the president. I know him. He called me up one day and says, "Dave, we can't maintain it anymore. We're getting too old." So we went and got it, and that's one took us about a year and 2,000 man-hours to restore it. It's outside now, just like this one. But again, the Vietnam guys like myself are getting a little bit old,
That's dedication. That's a lot of hours.
Oh, it is. And right now they're over there. I just went by the hangar. They're working on the Huey and the Cobra over there. And every Saturday we work at ICE. The pandemic has caused a slight problem for us because ICE is a government contractor and we only get to go in there on Saturdays. Well, to give you an example, let's talk my very first mission in Vietnam. I came into Vietnam, went to a replacement center, and I was, however you want to say it, I got assigned to the 52nd Aviation Battalion located at Dom Ba Thien. We flew Dom Ba Thien. There was 3 of my class that went there. Then they flew to Pleiku, Vietnam. Got into Pleiku, Vietnam about 5:30 at night, met the company commander, got a little bit of bite to eat, and told him to meet at the operations tent at 7 o'clock in the morning. We had a combat assault going on the next day. My best friend, Bill Smith, and my best man, we shared the same tent. We had two to a tent. It was raining so hard, it was a monsoon season. If you smoked, all you had to do was put your cigarette butt because the water was going through the bottom of your tin. Okay. We got up that first morning, went and got a little bit of breakfast, got the briefing. The next thing you know, I'm climbing into the right seat of a UH-1 over there, and we're on a combat assault, and I had no idea what was going to go on. Just to give you an example, there are 2 FM radios in there. There's one VHF radio, one UHF radio, and the combat assault was a 10 shipper. So we had 10 UH-1 troop shits, and I was in one of the troop shits. I was just riding along as the aircraft commander said, don't touch anything. And the next thing you know, the radios are blowing, the LZ's blowing up in front of you, the gunships are prepping, they're right below you firing the rockets, you know. And I said, what did I sign up for? And it doesn't take long, you learn pretty fast. Like I say, I made aircraft commander in 2 months, not because I was a good pilot, but for the short pilots. Then I went into the guns in 3 months, you know, so you learn fast.
So things were moving so fast you didn't have time to be scared.
That's exactly right, and people act about that. You don't think it's going to be you until you come home and the bunk next to you, or you knew the guy that got shot down.
The Flying Fortress. They called it a Flying Fortress because there were guns everywhere. The top, bottom, back, sides, to protect it. Is that right?
That's right. It's the best airplane that was ever in the air.
It's huge.
It is huge. Inside it gets smaller.
Because, and it's open. The cockpit's open. So you would have to fly up. When you get to 10,000 feet, you need oxygen.
Yes.
You have to wear a flak jacket.
Yes.
You have a helmet.
Yes.
And it's cold up there.
No. We have a heated suit.
Oh, you're not. So, tell me about flying this plane. This must have just been incredible.
Flying the airplane.
Yes, 25 missions over Germany. That's a whole tour. 25.
Well, it was. Since I flew at the very end of the war, the next to the last mission our group flew in combat, I only flew 25. But at that time, the tour was 35.
Oh, at that time.
Because the Germans were pretty well controlled as far as airplanes go. Their airplanes, fighter airplanes. No.
And when you went out on a mission, you like a raid, they called it a raid, went over Germany. You went with other B-17s.
Sometimes very many.
And you had to hold your position, no matter
Yes.
what, because that was critical to effective bombing.
Yes, it positioned the guns so everybody had a shot if they had problems.
Was that difficult to do on some of these raids?
Well, yes, it was, particularly when the clouds got real heavy and you couldn't see real well. Those were difficult times.
Did you come from a military family?
No, I came from a farming family.
So what made you want to fly B-17s?
I just thought flying would be a good thing, and then I had one quarter of college before I enlisted, and my professor had flown World War I aircraft, so he was always telling us the story, and it became interesting and intriguing. And so when the time came and my number was up there, I was going to some service, I decided that I'd rather try the Air Force. I'd like to be a pilot. So it all worked out.
So you think part of it was the excitement of doing something different? You just wanted to leave farming behind and just get out there in the world.
I don't know about getting out in the world.
See the world.
So what was your most frightening experience?
Well, the most frightening experience is on the bomb run, when the bombardier controls the airplane and you have no means of avoiding anything, so you're flying straight and level making a beautiful target. And those were frightening times because if they did have your altitude and your course, you were flying right into it, couldn't do a thing about it.
And these raids were always during the day. Is that
The
right?
raids that the Americans, I can't say absolutely everyone, but most everyone.
So you have school children that come here to visit. What do you have to tell them about your experience?
They know more about these airplanes than you can imagine, and they ask questions more about the airplane than they do about the fight or the combat. But
So they're intrigued with the airplane, though.
yes, they are. Yeah, they all agree that this is the best airplane on the floor. Casey Jones was flown by B-17s. I flew Casey Jones immediately after the war. The 306 bomb group, which I was in, and the 305th flew Casey Jones. Casey Jones was a secret project at the time, photographing the entire continent of Europe, some of Africa. So that's what we did for almost a year. And that was done by B-17s.
You got to tell the story about Betty Grable there.
You are?
You tell them.
I don't know anything about Betty Grable except that she was quite popular during the war.
You're quite right. The airplane was Sentimental Journey, and guys here restored this aircraft. How many? 12, 13 years to restore it, if I remember right. To restore it. And they started restoring before we had a hangar. We finally got it done. But Betty Grable, that portrait is supposedly the most famous portrait in World War II. Okay? And you're seeing her. Now, why my kids would say you're seeing her booties back here? Why do you think that picture was taken that way? Again, most famous portrait, pinup girl in World War II. She was 6 months pregnant when the picture was made.
Oh, okay.
So they made the picture that way. I think she was married, Harry James, I think she was married to. And when these guys were putting this airplane together, they called him up and said, we'd like to put her on the side of the Sentimental Journey, would you mind? And she was dead. And he said she would be quite honored to have her picture, so they put the picture of her on this airplane. Those are all people that flew in the B-17 in World War II. They get the honor of signing those Bombay doors. Now, Fred, I got to ask you a question now. Fred, when you flew the B-17, there was no ladder here, was there?
I don't recall any ladder at all.
Well, if you ever watch the movie 12 O'Clock High, I had to watch, I went to Air Command and Staff College and the Air Force, because of the losses these guys had, especially the first couple of years in the war. You got in by having like this, and they just jumped in the aircraft.
So you jumped in this aircraft without the ladder.
Wouldn't like it, yeah. The largest raid that I'm aware of was, I can't remember the date, but it was my 13th mission. So I kind of remember it, probably the roughest mission that I was on. But there were 1,300 heavies and 750 fighters. If I remember right, there are 27 heavy fields in England. So there were a lot of airplanes taken off from all over. And sometimes those raids even included airplanes from Italy. And, you couldn't all hit the very same target. So,
And what was navigation like back then?
yeah, after all, we flew an airplane across the ocean to get over there. And the navigator got us there. I checked on him to see if he thought he could get us there. I warned him not to get past England. But but it worked out fine. They're very good. The only time the navigator actually got confused, flying wing position in the clouds got so dense I couldn't see the airplane that I was flying off of. And I was afraid I'd either drift out. I mean, he'd drift out or I'd drift in. So I knew my position there, and I peeled right off and went down to get under the clouds. And so when we straightened out, I said, "Joe, where are we?" He said, "I have no idea. You've tumbled my gyros."
So a lot of it was just vision. I mean, you're just looking out that
Yeah.
window with no
Yeah.
paint on it, with the
Yes.
wind blowing in your face, trying to figure out where the heck you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Those were times that you remember more than each individual mission, when you had fortunately an unfatal accident. And,
Did you fly every day then? Or?
no. I think my longest sequence was 3 missions in a row. And then it could be as much as a week, but less than that ordinary.
So when you had that week off, what would you be doing?
Well, they required training, instrument flight checks, and then sometimes you got a day off, we'd take off from the base and go down to the rehab. It was a house in France. It was very nice. We'd go down there. What was her name? Doesn't matter. But I'd heard je ne sais pas French. So I asked her what je ne sais pas meant, and she said, "I don't know." So I thought, well, I'm not doing very good, and I pronounced it again very carefully, and she said, "I don't know." So do you know what that means?
You're going to tell me.
I don't know. That's what it means.
You're really a comedian part-time, right?
No.
You're not just a pilot, you're a comedian. You do stand-up at night?
Yeah, sometimes I stand up. Okay. Yeah.
So what do you miss about Europe? Do you miss anything about being over there?
Europe, I liked England, and when we got over to Germany, they were, well, there wasn't, Germany was kind of bombed out, I'd say, but I did end up with Casey Jones. I ended up at Giebelstadt in Germany, and at that time there was no fraternization with the Germans. You weren't supposed to talk to them, but sometimes it was kind of necessary. Giebelstadt, the Corps was building a new concrete runway, and so we had people from there, the prison camp, the German prison camp there, they would come into the base, come into the areas where we lived, and had a German prisoner of war that was a barber. And I remember the first time I went in there and asked him for a shave and a haircut, and he come with his razor. Wait a while. Do I want to do this?
You were brave then.
Well, that razor looked awful.
Yeah.
So how often do you come here and talk to people?
Saturdays.
Every Saturday, okay.
The F-4 is that they built about 5,000 F-4s, and it came along at a time when the Navy, who read the original contract, said, hey, we need an airplane to have air superiority, the new air superiority aircraft of the day, in the mid-1950s. And by the time they wrote the contract, they said, we not only want the airplane to be the new air superiority airplane of the day, we want it to do this, 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 and this. So we're going to build it with as many hard points to hang stuff on as we possibly can. And so we tried to use the F-4 over its time in the American Air Force and Navy and Marines to be an air-to-air combat aircraft, which is what it was designed for originally, to be a air-to-ground dive bomber, to be a strategic bomber, much like the bombers of World War II or the larger bombers of its day. We designed it to be we had a version that was a reconnaissance airplane that had sensors and both electronic and cameras. We used it for a couple other missions. One of those was in the Fast FAC program. The FAC stands for Forward Air Controller. And so the FACs had traditionally come out of World War II flying slow airplanes. And the issue was always, so what can you put in your slow airplane? How many people, how many radios, and how much ordnance? And the evolution kind of gelled when we got to Southeast Asia, when we made F-4s, fast FACs, along with the F-100, which was the original fast FAC, and the Marines had A-4s. And in that airplane, because they were fighter aircraft from the start, we said, hey, we can equip them with a backseater. They came that way. We can equip them with 2.75 phosphorus rockets to mark targets with. And they come equipped with a way to hold other ordnance, and maybe we can use them as sort of an armed reconnaissance kind of a role, or as it evolved a little more, maybe to hold off the bad guys until we get the fighter bombers here that they're controlling or the slow FACs are controlling. Well, the airplane that I flew in Southeast Asia was a opportunity for the slow FAC evolution to finally get to an airplane that before Southeast Asia was over for the U.S., we're using it in an armed role as well. Initially starting out, the OV-10 starting out as a purely reconnaissance, purely forward air controller, air manager, purely search and rescue coordinator mission, but evolved because we finally had the platform, unlike where we started 40 years prior. Finally had the platform to haul ordnance. And so we started to use that by the time we left Southeast Asia in this same role of an armed reconnaissance role. But that is to say, you do the forward air controlling role, reconnaissance, management, search and rescue, extraction, but you now have the ability to hold the bad guys off until the fighter bombers come in to the area. It was a great contest, contrast, and debate. Easy to observe as a young lieutenant when I was over there, that between what the theater appeared to need, which were airplanes that didn't really go very fast, and the weapon systems that we were touting and developing because of the nuclear war or strategic war, that all went fast, carried a lot of weight, etc. And so that contrast made the place where I was based at really highlight this dramatic difference. In the fact that where I was based, there were no pure jet aircraft. We had 8 squadrons. I flew in one of 2 that had turbine-powered aircraft, and they had pistons on, or propellers on them. And the other 6 were all World War II or Korean War aircraft, because they had the slower speed, they could still carry the weight, and they could take the combat loss to do the mission. And throughout all of Southeast Asia, that was a real mix master. Most of our fighter escort or fighter support was, of course, jet-powered aircraft. The forward air controller mission really got started in World War II, as I already said, but it was highlighted in Southeast Asia because combat had now evolved on the ground to driving tanks was not a very common event anymore. Driving jeeps was not really common. Wearing uniforms was not really very common, particularly on the other side. And so, and actually a lot of our special ops people neither. And so the problem was, how do you tell the bad guys from the good guys? How do you figure that out? And particularly when the problem was they were in a non-developed part of the world, right? Some roads with not many, a lot of growth, a lot of vegetation. And so the forward air controller came along to try to sort that out for the folks who were moving much faster than it was comfortably easy to see where the good guys and the bad guys were. And so that was a real how to sort that out. And so airplanes that were particularly good at close air support were not your fastest airplane. and yet that is predominantly what we had, except for this limited availability of slower aircraft that could do the job. Plane that was turbine powered, but was a twin engine aircraft, was a turboprop, was designed in the 60s, had a top speed, it had a speed range that was kind of interesting. It had the capability, it was part of their design criteria, to not to get technical, but to be able to pull 2 Gs at 5,000 feet at full gross weight, or at 65 knots, or it had a max speed of 340 knots, about, straight down. Now, the most challenging part, I would say, was managing the air assets that you had to find the target, put on the target, have operate in the airspace that you were in, and not run into each other or the ground, and of course figure out eventually if someone got shot down so far from behind the enemy lines, how you were going to get them extracted.
So you had to go in on rescue missions.
Had to go in on rescue missions also. So the rescue missions were, I would argue, were probably the most challenging rescue mission, or most challenging missions, because you knew at the end of this operation was at risks 1 or more people on the ground. And the problem was, are you going to be able to get them out? And of course highlighted, particularly in flying over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, it highlighted to what great lengths the Americans are willing to go to bring back every last soldier that got, every last military person that was in danger or risk, or was in risk of being left behind.
And they were committed to that.
Yeah, they were extremely committed to that. So here's the OV-10 right here. So it had, and you can see these are all to scale. So you can go and you can see that this airplane was probably the size of the A4s over there. It was a little bit smaller than the A7s, but it was relative to the slow-fac airplanes of the Southeast Asia era. Anyways, this was the end. This was the airplane that was developed and eventually replaced all of these airplanes by the time the U.S. left Southeast Asia. Provided a whole new capability, as we've talked a little bit about, in terms of the weapons you could carry, the speed range you could fly, the distances you could go, and the communications gear that you naturally carried. You didn't have to jam it into the middle of nowhere. You actually had an avionics bay or housing where you could actually put the radios. And so the aircraft came equipped with quite a bit of capability, in the eventually replaced, at least in the bigger picture, by drones of today. Remote piloted vehicles we replaced, where this mission lost quite a few people on Southeast Asia. 150 some folks got killed flying this mission in all the different parts of the theater. And so one way that we don't do that piece at all is we fly drones. We have drones that have sensors on them. We have drones, as you probably well know, that have bombs on them, very precise guided bombs, which was another evolution that happened during Southeast Asia, the recognition that, well, Southeast Asia had a real mix master of different kinds of theaters, interdiction along the trail, which is a classic combat problem for taking over a country, to harbors, to villages, to tribes, to 1 or 2 or a group of 6 or so. So we're in counterinsurgency warfare has gone to, in the meantime, of course, in the last 50 years, is we don't have any interdictions to fly. We don't have any villages, or we don't have any harbors to bomb. We have only villages and small groups. And so the weaponry has gotten very, very precise. As one of the other American tenets that we learned the hard way in Southeast Asia is, it does no good to drop bombs on the wrong people. It only aggravates the situation, which has a lot of moving parts, social unrest, civil war, ethnic problems, economic problems, and so you don't need to do that. It's a really major American tenet. So as a result, weaponry has gotten quite small, quite narrow, and this type of airplane, or an airplane that carries that, or drones, now carry guided weapons that are very limited in what they can do, because we're not, as I explained to people, we're interested in not blowing up the village. We're only interested in blowing up the outhouse in back of the hut.
That's very precise.
Just the outhouse.
So, where did you land this plane? Do you have runways that you actually landed on?
Yes, I operated out of a real base in Thailand. And so, but the airplane was designed by a couple of Marine pilots, as it turns out, and it was designed to land on dirt, unimproved, uneven strips. And so in Vietnam, the Air Force used this airplane, as well as these others like that. But this airplane was relatively larger. They used this airplane on dirt or gravel strips in a whole variety of places, relatively short. It was designed to land on short fields. It was designed, its landing gears are such that, not to get technical, but the landing gears are, all three of them are designed to be trailing link landing gears. So you can imagine a landing gear has a wheel on the bottom. When you land, the strut compresses, and that's the end of it, right? These landing gears are designed to all three wheels actually tuck back. So you can literally land, and all three wheels will tuck back. The nose wheel and the two main gear will tuck back, and so the landing can be relatively firm, and the shock to the aircraft is relatively reasonable. So the Navy designed it because it was a tri-service airplane. The Navy's input was, excuse me, we want to be able to land about 800 feet a minute at sink rate. And so in training, we didn't do it in practice, because in practice, for our mission, we carried such a large drop tank. For this airplane, it would on the F4 over there. We'll make a look at it later on. It would be about the size, a little bit smaller than the size of their the tip tank, or the not tip tanks, the drop tanks that are out on the wing. The tank underneath the fuselage in the F4 is another story. So in training, however, we practiced landing to take full advantage of that landing gear. So we did that, and we did it on instruments. We had a back instructor in the back seat, if I remember right, and of course you were flying instruments, and which is very easy to see when someone's not flying instruments. It's not as nearly precise. It would just land and go bang, just like on a carrier deck, except it wasn't moving. And it wasn't at night, and it wasn't on the water. So that's a lot of exceptions. But in a sense of no
Well,
ramp.
at least you had some training.
Yes. So, but when we got to the theater, because of that, this airplane, because the tank was so large, this airplane we were restricted from those type of landings, and from landing at the full capacity of the short field capability. Because, well, you could do it, the plane could do it. It had a tendency to take the drop tank, which hung on the bottom, in the middle, as you can see, and smash it right into the ground. That's how much the gear compressed. Yeah, the Distinguished Flying Cross Award, I meant to look up the details the other day when I knew I was coming down here, but it was related to a extraction, to someone who was shot down. And so the problem now, particularly in that type of environment with a lot of anti-aircraft guns, and we can take a look at a picture over here on the Southeast Asia exhibit of just one of those in the environment. The problem was, first of all, we had to suppress the anti-aircraft gunfire in the region, in the area. And then the next thing you had to do was guess or estimate, is it suppressed good enough? We can now bring on the scene the following. Right. What we're going to need to do is get a long-range rescue helicopter like the CH-53 or its predecessor, the CH-3, which in the Southeast or in the Vietnam timeframe became air refuelable and started the whole air refuelable capability built into helicopters. Get that helicopter to come to the area where the downed air crew is, hover and or land. So sooner or later, no matter how you arrive there, the helicopter this big is going to get to sit still. So the guess is the area suppressed good enough so that you can do that? And to help this along, let's see, we had about 100 of these airplanes where we were, which flew support missions for the helicopters. They did a lot of other things, but relative to the long-range rescue, they literally flew, if you can picture this armada coming towards a target like that sign over there, where we're supposed to hover, helicopters in the middle, and a chain of A1s are on each side, and this whole chain is progressing at the rate of probably 130 knots towards where the helicopter is going to have to hover or land. And the A-1s are running this daisy chain down both sides to try to suppress the ground fire so the helicopter doesn't get shot down.
How many A1s were doing the daisy chain?
There was, I think, roughly maybe 3 aside, or maybe 4 aside. 4, and they would literally fly like a big racetrack, right? And except it was a constantly moving racetrack. So before you started this little maneuver, someone had to make that judgment, and the forward air controller, or if they were controlling the search and rescue operation, they would coordinate with the lead Sandy pilot. Sandy was the call sign for the search and rescue A1 guys. The A1s had several call signs, but the squadron that had the Sandys, they were the rescue people. They were flying that mission. And so that coordination went with them because they were going to be up close and personal, obviously, right? And so I think it was around 4 on a side. I'm not really always sure because it's fairly dynamic, and I don't know whether for example, the 2 flights of 4 came out, but they only flew 2 at a time. So that's a good question. It's a good question. And so if this worked right, they would come in, the helicopter wouldn't get shot down. The helicopter would hover, they'd put down a penetrator on a cable, maybe a rescue person would have to go down and help the injured person on the cable hoist and take them up, and then sometimes the PJ would have to get left on the ground until they sent the hoist down a second time. So many times the A1s are, of course, doing this trick, right? Now the daisy chain doesn't have to move, it's just in the vicinity of, and away you go. Well, that's what the DFC was working on. Well, I think it was actually a composite of the search and rescue operations. We had several. Unfortunately, they weren't all always successful. And probably one of the most famous ones that I was involved with was, you can look this up on a lot of places, the Boxer 2-2. Boxer 2-2 was shot down. They were flying F4s, flight of 2, and 2 rolled into the target first, because after I marked it. We weren't very far from a part of the world called the Mugia Pass. Mugia Pass was one of the significant canyons, if you will, roadways into North Vietnam, and got shot down. The number 2 got shot down, and the 2 crew member, one each landed on each side of a small river. And so they landed in an area, because it was by Mugia Pass, where there was an awful lot of anti-aircraft fire. So 37 millimeter, I was going to show you a picture of what one looks like. So this is a 37 millimeter gun that's hard to see in this picture. It had a crew of 2 on it, and it shot shells that were 37 millimeters in diameter. And they had the characteristic that after they went up a few thousand feet, like around 7, they blew up. So then you got flak out of them. And so the problem with where Boxer 2-2 was shot down was the intensity or the concentration of anti-aircraft guns. And so the first day, the first events that we did that I asked for was to find. It turns out, for various reasons not to go into here, I asked for a flight of F-100s to come in and help suppress the area around where the 2 crew members were on the ground, just to get started. And then there was another one of those debates that said, I think we should have guided missiles to be able to blow up the caves where the guns are being stored. No, the guided missiles are not that accurate. Yes, they are. No, they're not. And so eventually, before the first day was out, long after I was about to run out of gas and had to go land, and I'm not air refuelable in that airplane, they brought fighters in that had air-to-air or air-to-ground missiles. So the first day, the 2 guys were on the ground, but at the end of the first day, regrettably, the front seat, the pilot, got killed. And we didn't confirm that till many years later, but actually on theater we knew about it. So the second day started. And the second day, it was decided to take the section of the road and divide it up into 1-mile blocks. And a FAC got each 1 mile. So 1 mile, 1 mile, 1 mile. I had one of those miles, second day. And the second day, we ran A1s, which was almost unheard of to run A1s on the trail, because by that time, except at nighttime, the A1 speed range was not appropriate for the kind of defenses around the trail. We had an advantage because we didn't have to track the target time after time, right? We could track a target once, didn't have to fly with a formation, etc. So we ran an alternate arrangement of A1s on the target and fast movers, so other F4s or F100s or 105s, and we'd alternate in our 1 mile block blowing up things on the ground, or trying to blow up things on the ground, guns, gun emplacements, whatever we could find to try to suppress the ground fire. Because the end game is you have to go get the helicopter to hover over where the person is, right? Now there's only one person on the ground. So the first day we may have tried this to attempt to rescue once or twice. The second day we tried it 3 or 4 times. This same armada, right? Helicopter, A1s.
You still had your same 1 mile, the same mile.
Same mile, right?
Mile, okay.
And every once in a while you'd stop because someone thought it was worth the guess, worth the gamble, right? Didn't work the second day either. So the third day, in the morning of the third day, I was now flying another mission to another interesting place on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and one of my compadres called up on the radio and said that they finally got the remaining of the 2 guys out.
But they pulled you off the 1 mile to go do another mission.
The next day, yes, that's right. So the missions, like a lot of things, the missions we got each day tended to be assigned at the end of the day, and would rotate for a variety of reasons that were way above my pay grade. Either you can imagine all sorts of reasons, but so the third day when I wasn't on that mission, of course, having been the fact when they got shot down, I heard this and I go, I told him, I was still telling this guy, because I was in the middle of running a strike myself, the third day on another place, and I think I said to him, would you wait a minute, please? And at the end I said, you can interrupt me with news like that any day you want. When Bergeron was extracted, of course, all those A1s and the helicopters and us are based at the same place. All the other fighters are based somewhere else. Naturally, because that's too many airplanes otherwise. And so that night in the officers club, there was a massive celebration. Yeah. But that group, the rescue, the A1s and the Jolly Green pilots is what their call signs was, they had a regular celebration in the club because they were always involved in rescuing one. Yeah. But anyways, for Bergeron, it was a particular, because it was a 3-day worth, right? It was a pretty extensive. Well, in an event a couple months prior to Bergeron getting extracted, who got shot down in early December and got picked up. And it reminds me that we had a docent here who's just retired maybe a year ago, who was shot down 3 days after Bergeron and his front seater was shot down 15 miles away. And he and I have worked together for some time. He flew F4s as a fast FAC, and I was flying OV-10s as a slow FAC in the same theater, same time. Didn't know each other at the time. Anyways, a couple months prior to Bergeron being extracted, there was another, these many, almost not daily, but almost daily extraction missions. And the next morning, I came to the club to go to breakfast, and I was going to go on another mission. Right? Obviously, I came on a regular basis, like virtually every day. And I was walking up the sidewalk. I can still picture this. And sitting out front was the base wing commander's car. And in front of his car, on the street, were these massive Jolly Green footprints. And as I followed them backwards, they went right over top of his car. On his car, in the front door of the club. Or in other words, actually, they were coming out of the front door of the club, over top of his car, and they went down the street. And because that individual was a great commander and understood what kind of missions all these folks are flying, he didn't raise one eyebrow for the whole thing.
Hello, I'm Marty Post. I'm the executive officer here at Airbase, Arizona. I'm a retired Marine. I retired as a Major General in the Marine Corps. I was an aviator, flew A-6 Intruders and the F-18 Hornets during my career. Multiple deployments, Beirut back in the early 80s, Desert Storm, Bosnia, Iraq a couple times, so a lot of opportunities to go around the world in different conflicts. I did not. I was always interested in aviation, and when I had an opportunity to, actually a recruiter showed up on campus where I was going to school, and a Marine recruiter, and he had a pamphlet there that said, hey, we fly airplanes, and I said, I'll sign up. I took the test, I passed the test, and the rest is history.
Marines, oh, that's the most difficult basic training of all the services. Would you agree?
It was challenging. Yeah, I think the Marine Corps would probably tell you that 12 weeks of basic training for the Marine Corps is challenging to the young individuals who make that decision. Of course, we have 2 training bases, Parris Island, the infamous Parris Island in South Carolina, and of course we also train in San Diego, California. Basically Mississippi, we split in the Mississippi, East, West Coast, and that's how we do our training in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, not only is it difficult, but it's long, like you said, 12 weeks.
It's 12 weeks. I think it's a little longer in some of the other services, but you know, we plus all Marines are riflemen, so they spend a full week at the rifle range, or a week in prep, and another whole week to become qualified with a weapon, with a rifle. So very intense training for the young these young men and women who join the Marine Corps. Well, you just go through your career. You go from basically tour to tour as you kind of grow through the Marine Corps, so to speak. But I was an aviator. I was a pilot, so I spent the majority of my time flying airplanes, and it's just kind of progressed. I was quite frankly, I was quite lucky, because back in the early '90s, I was after Desert Storm. They retired the A6, an intruder from the Marine Corps, and then we're going to go to the F-18. And I was just at the cusp, senior enough to where I transitioned to the F-18 and was a commanding officer for an F-18 squadron in Beaufort, South Carolina. And then from there, I was lucky enough to get selected to go be the commanding officer of the Marine Weapons School, Aviation Weapons School in Yuma, Arizona. I did a tour there as an instructor, and then I went back in the early 2000s as a commanding officer of the weapons school. And then from there, basically headquarters tours, Pentagon tours, a couple of Pentagon tours, and then I went out to the Pacific and was operations officer for the U.S. Pacific Command in Honolulu. And then my last tour was I spent a year in Iraq. Heck, I always thought I'd get out as a captain, and go do something else. I just kind of hung around long enough, and they kept promoting me, so that's kind of how that worked out.
Let's say major generals, they have to retire after 5 years in rank or 35 years of service?
It really depends upon the career path. Actually, from up to 2-star general, it's for a selection board process. 3-star and 4-star are all billet specific. You have to be elevated to a specific billet to get promoted to that rank. And basically, when I came out of Iraq, I was kind of ready. Made a decision at that point to go ahead and retire. Probably the last tour. I mean, obviously, I was in a lot of conflicts over the years, but the last year, the whole year in Iraq, we were over there doing basically nation building. We weren't doing offensive combat operations. We were basically trying to support the population, and the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps is in Anbar Province, which was where the Sunni population is in Iraq. And so it was a challenge to go over there and try to help them get the mindset of how a society runs in a democratic way. I used to tell people when I talked to the Iraqis over there, the governor of the province, who I work with on a daily basis, that here in the United States, we pay for water, we pay for sewage, we pay for electricity, all the things that I don't think they really understood, that how we make our economy, or how we live here, we basically have to pay our way, so to speak. As in our world, so to speak. So it was just getting their arms around it, because the only thing the Iraqis paid for was basically black market fuel. Everything else was free. They had electrical system, but it was maybe 6 or 7 hours a day. All the money came from Baghdad. There was no really opportunity for the local governor or the provincial governor to generate money. They didn't have taxes for the people, so everything sales taxes, everything we would expect how the city of Mesa runs, for example. that process, property taxes and so forth. There was none of that. So all the money came from funneled down from Baghdad, and that's just basically how it was built. And so trying to get them to think about, how this would evolve over time was a challenge. And great people, I will tell you, the Iraqi people are great people. They have their challenges for sure, and they're still going to continue to have their challenges. But when you worked at that level, at the local level, dealing with them, they would, they were just trying to survive like a lot of other folks are.
So what would be a typical day for you when you were in Iraq?
Typical day, we'd get up. We were initially in Fallujah, where our headquarters was, and of course you know that name, I'm sure. And then we moved to the Al-Assad Airbase for our headquarters. But I would basically on a daily basis meet with the governor or go to Baghdad, have meetings, and trying to figure out how we could get the economy running. What we did is we started a refinery back up. There was a refinery in Anbar province. And of course, all the oil, there was no oil out there, but they would ship the oil down from the north in pipelines. Well, of course, the pipelines had been blown up, but there was a railroad that ran next to the pipeline. So we basically were shipping railroad cars full of oil and restarted the refinery. It took us about 5 months to do that, but we actually were producing petroleum and gas in Anbar province during the year I was there. And we had a lot of other successes. We built an infrastructure for them in conjunction with the Iraqis, just trying to help, from a war-torn environment to kind of get it back to more of a peacetime environment. There was obviously a lot of destruction around the cities, and so we were just trying to help collectively. And of course, Anbar province back in the day was huge agricultural. They had the Euphrates River running through there. It was, and we just tried to help on that side, try to help get that whole process going again.
The Iraqi people were probably happy you were there.
They were, they were, and I think that they would always ask. I think they were always thinking could we do more for them, But it was, and we did as much as we could. So just trying to help educate them as far as processes. I did a lot of trips to Jordan and talking to the Iraqis who left Iraq, went to Jordan, who were kind of holding out to see what was going to happen with the country and trying to get them to come back to the country to reinvest in the country, because a lot of them that left were financially secure, and so we wanted to get those folks back into the country to help generate the economy.
So you felt like you did the best you could there?
Well, yeah, I think we did. We had 26,000 Marines there for the year, and all spread out throughout the province, and it's the largest province in Iraq. And it was a challenge. I mean, we lost a bunch of Marines, unfortunately, over there. Roadside bombs and that type of thing. Even though we weren't doing offensive operations, we were going out there on a day-to-day basis, driving the roads and interacting with the populace.
So what would you want civilians to know about military life?
I think the structure. It's going to be a structured process for an individual. As a matter of fact, I'm on the 9th of April. I'm going to go talk to a junior ROTC is having a graduation, and I'm going to go head to a dinner and talk to them. And I think the one thing in some cases, I think the youngins, they look at these movies and they look at these games they play and they fantasize, and that's not the real world. You really have to talk to them and say, when you really get out there on a day-to-day basis, it is challenging, and we so much depend upon the young sergeants, 20, 22, 23 years old. They're the ones that are out there doing the hard work. They're the ones that are interfacing with the local people, or if you're doing a combat operations, they're the ones that are actually doing the combat operations. So it is a demanding effort. You're going to mature very rapidly. You're going to see a lot of things, but it's and you basically, the biggest thing is you get a lot of friends who you never really, especially that first group of folks, you always remember them. You always kind of get back to them over time. Airbase Arizona over the years, basically from the 70s when they first started, no hangars. Just got the airplanes, Sentinel Journey and Maiden Shade, the B-25 and the B-17. the effort that was put in all those years ago, the fundraising, to make all this happen. So when you walk in here and see this facility, that was done by just hard work, volunteers kind of getting their arms dirty and to make all this work. Our challenge is continuing to. Of course, it's an all-volunteer organization. We have one employee, and she kind of keeps the books and keeps us out of trouble financially, so to speak. But our challenge is to continue to mature the facility, get new artifacts in here, get new aircraft in here over time, and just make it as interactive as we can with the folks who come visit us. And of course, we're unique in a lot of ways because not only do we have a museum with static aircraft sitting in here, we have airplanes that fly. We have the 6 aircraft that we fly. We fly passengers, we fly revenue passengers, and the other thing you'll notice there's nothing roped off in here. We can let everybody walk through the museum, touch everything, walk right up to the aircraft, go into or look into the aircraft. So it's in some cases, a lot of other museums where they're roped off and you really can't get that feel, so to speak. And what we strive to do is make it as touchy as we can, make sure people get the most experience out of it that they possibly can.
What's new? What's coming to the museum? I know you've just got a new drone.
We did get a United States Army had a drone here that was used in the different operations. They discontinued this, or retired this specific drone, so we had an opportunity to get our hands on one. So that basically brings us up to the war on terror, so to speak, because a lot of folks they hear about them, they kind of see pictures of them, but here we're going to have one that actually was flown and get a better idea of what that means, because especially like what's going on in Ukraine, you hear about these drones they're flying and how that's working. Well, this is an example of what they're actually using on a day-to-day basis.